Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello and welcome to sort of a gray, dark, dreary Monday in the ATL. And I don't know why. I mean, we should all be like just sunshine and rainbows after the Atlanta Hawks won their very first NBA draft lottery, the top pick in the upcoming NBA draft. But here's the gray cloud. There's no consensus. Michael Jordan, Victor Wembanyama. There's no LeBron James. Just a lot of, okay, yeah. That would be a good piece to add to the draft. And I, as a Falcons and Hawks and Braves fan, not so much the Braves, but with the Falcons and the Hawks, you can almost sense the dread. The sense of dread. How are we going to mess that up? But you didn't come here to listen to me talk sports, so I won't talk sports. Although I would say that that Klingon kid from UConn, the big, tall, yeah, he's the one. Although everybody's looking at video of a kid from France, Alex Sarr. Everybody is checking him out as well. Again, somehow the Hawks will manage to mess that up. You came here to listen to me talk politics, however. It is graduation day, commencement ceremony for Emory University, but not at Emory University. WSB Channel 2 giving you that report today.
New developments now. Thousands of Emory University graduates and loved ones gathered this morning for commencement, but not on campus. Emory moved the ceremony to the Gas South Arena because of campus unrest. And Channel 2 Steve Gelbach is live right now in Gwinnett County. And Steve, there were no major disruptions or protests today.
That's right. There were no major issues. And there, at the protests, really weren't many either until police showed up. I'll tell you about an anecdotal story that I'd like to share. Speaking with a Emory law grad over the weekend with some of her friends and talk about much ado about nothing. Anyway, let's go back to the story here from WSB's Channel 2.
No, but they were ready for any kind of demonstration or display with heavy security. Now, we heard one group online that said they were going to be passing out small Palestinian flags and kiffahs going in. We never saw that, and there was only one short disruption with some shouting from the crowd. More than 5,000 2024 graduates arrived early Monday, more than 20 miles from their Atlanta campus.
Honestly, we're just feeling grateful that we actually have one.
They changed plans, rented cars, took rideshare, public transit, or carpooled after learning last week of the decision to move the ceremony because of security concerns. After pro-Palestinian protests and vandalism led to arrests at the same spot where commencement was supposed to take place.
Now, we are not in the quad today as originally planned. This is a reflection of the extraordinary times we're living through.
Our cameras weren't allowed inside the arena, but during the live stream when Emory President Gregory Fenves took the podium,
congratulations,
we did hear some yelling and heckling.
I'm not happy about it, but I guess I'm happy it's not canceled. I just think that all of this is a little bit outrageous.
There's been a lot of chaos, but I'm just happy we're finally here. We finally have some ceremony.
Most of these grads finished high school in 2020 and never donned caps and gowns for graduation.
Obviously, we didn't have one during high school, so this is extra special to all of us. Yeah.
As they end this chapter and start another, one word to describe this class: resilient.
Now, with a charged atmosphere on college campuses nationwide, you are once again adapting to the unprecedented.
And with the wet weather, maybe a good thing they were inside today. Now, I just checked with Emory. They say everything, according to them, went smoothly today. They're now broken up into their individual colleges and actually getting handed those diplomas as we speak. We're live in Gwinnett County. Steve Gelbach, Channel 2 Action News.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, by the way, adding to the reporting here, as students walked across the stage at those ceremonies later in the day, several dozen graduates handed over small Palestinian flags rather than shaking hands with Emory officials. Others wore keffiyehs over their robes or shouted "Free Palestine" as they walked across the stage. These demonstrations were among the few allowable forms of protest per Emory's open expression policy. That's Cassidy Alexander, Josh Reyes reporting for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Also, a footnote for those of you not in the metro area. Yes, it is gray, dreary, rainy today. Not sure the Braves and the Cubs are going to get to play. But then again, you didn't come here to hear me talk sports. I was going to sit here and go all off on Austin Riley and his oblique situation, which they're not calling an oblique situation. You didn't come here for sports. I understand. Anyway, the ceremonies today were going to be moved indoors regardless. So there's that. Okay, so this is purely anecdotal, and I'm not going to give names because, well, I told her I wasn't going to give her name. I spent a good deal of time, I would say about 45 minutes or so, with an Emory Law School grad. Passed the LSAT. She's going to go work as a public defender. So excited about her future she is. And I'm actually, I thought that was pretty heartwarming. She wasn't going to go work for some glitzy law firm or become a billboard attorney or anything like that. She's going to go work as a public defender. There was just something about that made me kind of swell up a little bit. I was like, man, that's awesome. Anyway, she apparently worked or grew up in a town I'm giving away way too much information about her, up in the north, anyway, near where there were a lot of for-profit prisons, and a lot of her family members and neighbors worked in the prison industry, and so she just is all too aware. There is everything to prison pipeline. There is the impoverished community to prison pipeline. There is the marginalized community prison to prison pipeline. There's the school to prison pipeline. She's just all too aware of it, and she said, you know what, I think I want to be a public defender. So very excited about that. Anyway, we got to spend about 45 minutes just talking casually in a social setting over the weekend, and I wanted to ask her, I'm like, so like many folks who aren't Emory students or faculty members or work on the campus in any way, shape, form, or fashion, I wasn't there for any of these protests. Tell me, she gave me the latest. She's like, it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing, and it wasn't distracting from anybody getting to class or getting to tests or any of that. The only time it got crazy was when the Emory University president decided to call on outside law enforcement to come curtail it. And we all saw what happened when he did that. APD showed up. APD with their soon-to-be Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility campus. Oh, look, another campus that they get to be police on. Georgia State Patrol showed up, and we've seen where Georgia State Patrol were literally picking people up and carrying them off like so not necessary. We saw them arresting professors. Deans, did I not see a dean? I know we saw 2 professors getting arrested. And I remember the statistic because the president had said of Emory University that these were outside agitators and they had to eat crow and release a statement that wasn't true. 20 of the 28 arrests were of the Emory community. Awkward. So anyway, I'm talking to this new law grad who, by the way, said that a lot of those that were arrested were from law school. Good on them. They know the system. They're getting a good taste of it anyway. She said, much ado about nothing. And I asked, I said, is the moving of the ceremonies to Duluth, is that a big deal to you? Does it bother you? And she said, no, not at all. In fact, she pointed to the forecast before I got to over the weekend. And I said, oh, yeah, it looks like it's going to rain on it. She said they were going to move it anyway. They were going to have to. So better that they got ahead of the curve, and maybe it'll be a more organized situation. It seems like it by all accounts, in local media was a smooth situation. But again, I'm talking to a law graduate here, a law school grad, an Emory law grad, who just opined without me needing to lead her into it in any way, shape, form, or fashion, how the Emory University president totally mishandled this, totally hyperventilated and hyperbolized, which of course led to pundits and politicians, Governor Brian Kemp, for example, opining about something that they were nowhere near. Burt Jones opining about something he was nowhere near. I asked this law school grad, I said, do you have Jewish friends? She said, yeah, a lot of them were arrested. She said, some of them were arrested. Wait, that means that they were protesting the university seeking to divest from the war or divest from Israel. She said, yep. Huh. I said, did they feel unsafe in any way, shape, form, or fashion because of the protests, or any of the other protesters make them feel uncomfortable? She said, of course not. They were among the protesters. Huh. It's almost as if that argument that there's so much anti-Semitism rife within these protests, it's all as if maybe that's a ruse or fiction or much ado about very little, if not nothing. That brings me to a soundbite I want to share from the Daily Beans podcast featuring John Fugelsang from, what day was this? What day is today? Well, this was on Friday. A lot of reaction of Joe Biden withholding bombs from Israel as anti-Semitic as well. John Fugelsang made a great point about all of this.
And I think that Biden's choices to withhold some munitions, if they go into Rafah, I want to say it's a very good thing. We're now going to watch the Republican Party try to paint Joe Biden as an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts to get really crazy. We should all get ready to hear, and Donald Trump's already doing it. Donald Trump is already claiming that Joe Biden is abandoning Israel. Israel's doing just fine, but get ready for the anti-Semitic nonsense to come. And this is the Republican Party. This is the party of Nick Fuentes, who's a Nazi, Milo Yiannopoulos, who's a Nazi, Kanye, who's a Nazi, the Great Replacement Theory Party, Donald Trump talking dual loyalty for American Jews, Donald Trump saying Jews have to get your act together and calling Jewish businessmen globalists, and Kevin McCarthy saying we can't allow Soros, Steyer, and Bloomberg to buy this election, and Marjorie Taylor Greene with her space lasers, and Matt Gaetz bringing a Holocaust denier to the State of the Union. This is the party that's going to try to smear Joe Biden as a Jew hater.
Also, by the way, I shared this via the Twitter X platform. You can follow me at RonShowATL, by the way. The Guardian printed this independent study. Nonprofit tracks political violence and political protests around the world, found that 97% of campus demonstrations over the war in Gaza that have taken place in the U.S. since mid-April have been peaceful. 97%. Well, gosh, if you watched local or national news or listened to your reliable right-wing talk radio hosts, Jesse Waters on Fox News, Laura Ingraham on Fox News, period, Newsmax, you would have thought that these were all violent protests. Huh. Ironically, anytime you see B-roll footage on cable news or on your nightly news of violence at these protests, who's there? Police. They're there. Well, if it's only violent when we see police activity there, and this independent, nonpartisan study was done that showed that 97% of these campus protests were peaceful, well, what can one conclude? Perhaps what the law graduate that I spent 45 minutes with, who's graduated today from Emory University, off to become a public defender, was telling me over the weekend. Yeah, much ado about nothing. Wasn't a big deal. ... She said, until the cops were called in. Congrats to our Emory grads. You're listening to The Ron Show, the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. Again, when you follow The Ron Show at RonShowATL on Twitter, X, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, you get some of what I talk about right away. I'll also include this stuff in the show notes at RonShowATL.com each day when you're listening to an episode via podcast or on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, or on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com. That particular episode has show notes where I do my best to always include the links that I cite. Like this one from Lois Beckett. I spoke about this just minutes ago. The Guardian reporting nearly all Gaza campus protests in the U.S. have been peaceful, according to a study. Analysis of 553 protests in solidarity with Palestinians between 18th of April and 3rd of May. The Europeans do that. April 18th, May 3rd. Found 97% of them did not cause serious damage. An independent nonprofit that tracks political violence and political protests around the world found that 97% of campus demonstrations over the war in Gaza that have taken place in the U.S. since mid-April have been peaceful. An analysis of 553 U.S. campus demonstrations nationwide between April 18th, May 3rd found that fewer than 20 resulted in any serious interpersonal violence or property damage, according to statistics from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED. We always have to make a word of something. Over the same period, ACLED, you know what? No, I'm sorry. That does work for me, as opposed to continuing to say Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. Phew. Over the same period, ACLED documented at least 70 instances of forceful police interventions against U.S. campus protests, which includes the arrest of demonstrators and the use of physical dispersal tactics, including the deployment of chemical agents, batons, and other kinds of physical force. Nearly half of the campus protests that ACLED categorized as violent involved protesters fighting with law enforcement during police interventions, according to the group's data. It's almost as if the cops arriving at the 97% of the peaceful demonstrations taking place suddenly make them less peaceful. Protest encampments in solidarity with Gaza have popped up on college campuses, according to Louis Beckett, across the U.S. since April, with students voicing a variety of demands, including calls for universities to publicly support a ceasefire in Gaza, divest from Israeli companies and companies that support Israel's military, and cut ties with Israeli universities. The protests have inspired similar actions across the UK and Europe, as well as in India and Lebanon. Since April 18th, when 108 students were arrested at Columbia University, the administrators of many schools have called in law enforcement to forcibly remove the encampments, like in Emory, resulting in more than 2,600 arrests across more than 50 U.S. campuses, according to an ongoing tally by the Associated Press. University leaders have said that student protesters are disrupting campus life, jeopardizing student safety, creating a, quote, harassing and intimidating environment. And in the words of the University of Southern California president, Carol Folt, quote, spiraling in a dangerous direction. Joe Biden has also criticized the campus protests, warning that, quote, dissent must never lead to disorder and that violent protest is not protected. And yet, ACLED determined 97% of these demonstrations were peaceful. Back to Louis Beckett's reporting, ACLED's analysis of more than 550 campus protests through May 3rd found 2 instances of property damage, serious enough to disqualify the demonstration as peaceful. Protesters at Portland State University, who shattered glass and damaged furniture and computers during their occupation of a campus library, and protesters at Columbia University, who broke windows during their occupation at a campus building, both on April 30th. Louis Beckett spoke to some folks with ACLED to kind of get a little behind the curtains rationale here. Kieran Doyle says, we don't consider graffiti or spray paint to be enough property destruction to be indicative of a violent demonstration. He is ACLED's North America Research Manager. Again, Kieran Doyle. ACLED defines peaceful protest as ones without serious physical violence or property damage. Its bar for categorizing a demonstration as violent includes, quote, physical violence that rises above pushing or shoving, or property destruction that involves breaking a window or worse. By that definition, the vast majority of recent U.S. campus protests have remained peaceful. Beckett writes, among the 3% of U.S. campus protests through May 3rd that ACLED did categorize as violent, only a handful involved physical violence between pro-Palestinian protesters and counter-protesters or other bystanders rather than property damage or confrontations with police. In the most prominent incident of violence at campus protests so far, a Gaza Solidarity encampment at the University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA, was attacked by a group of masked counter-demonstrators who tried to tear down the encampment and assaulted students with projectiles, fireworks, and chemical agents. Both groups clashed for hours, while law enforcement officials retreated or failed to intervene. The late-night attack at UCLA followed 2 previous instances of less serious violence at UCLA, according to ACLED's data, including reports of demonstrators on different sides trading punches on April 28th. If you were hearing me read that piece about the UCLA counter-protests and going, wait, the media hasn't covered this. That's right. Brian Edward Stone at Twitter X, BEStoneTX, tweeted, one of UCLA's attackers, identified as a pro-Israel counter-protester, also, quote, took part in several demonstrations over the past year where he was photographed making Nazi salutes. His social media history is rife with anti-Semitic and anti-LGBTQ plus protests. Again, that coming from a piece written by Ali Winston from The Guardian as well. As I've mentioned before, I like to include links to everything I discuss in the show via show notes at ronshowatl.com. Although I did actually retweet Brian Edward Stone's tweet of this. If you want to follow at Twitter X, that would be ronshowatl. Ali Winston reporting as the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, reeling from a late-night attack on a student protest encampment for Gaza last week, attention is turning to the disparate group of counter-protesters who had rallied against the encampment in the lead-up to the violence, including during chaotic dueling rallies 2 days before. Many witnesses to the April 30th melee observed that the small group of assailants, many of them masked, did not appear to be students. Oh, outside agitators. More than 30 people were injured, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations. Authorities are still working to identify the perpetrators and have not made any arrests, but researchers studying hate and anti-government groups have confirmed the presence at-the-counter demonstrations of several far-right activists who have been involved in anti-LGBTQ plus and anti-vaccine protests across Southern California over the past 3 years. Narek Palyan, an Armenian American from Los Angeles, Van Nuys neighborhood, was photographed on UCLA's campus on 26 April amid a group of counter-protesters and again on the evening of April 30th, hours before the assault on the protest camp. Palyan took part in several Leave Our Kids Alone demonstrations at school board meetings in Southern California over the past year, where he was at times photographed making Nazi salutes. His social media history rife with anti-Semitic and anti-LGBTQ plus posts. The Leave Our Kids Alone protests have cropped up at school board demonstrations, book readings, and pride celebrations throughout Southern California, focusing anger from conservative parents on the recognition of LGBTQ plus identity and students in both curriculum and in classrooms. How about this next line? The demonstrations, part of a broader right-wing effort to sow unrest and undermine an alleged liberal agenda at U.S. schools, have at times been marked by violence and drawn far-right participants from around the region, including people associated with local Proud Boy and 3%er militia chapters and fundamentalist Christian churches. And yet, where is the media to report on any of that? Back after this.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
No way to sugarcoat the polling that came out, the New York Times Siena poll in battleground states, specifically some hand-wringing to be done for those left of center, or anybody who just, I don't know, would like to see democracy make it to the 2040s. New York Times Siena poll of registered voters. I'm going to stress registered voters, not likely voters, registered voters. Shows Trump ahead, 47-45 within Wisconsin. 47-44 in Pennsylvania, 49-42 in Arizona, 49-42 in Michigan, 49-39 in Georgia. Democrats, I'm telling y'all, this is not a purple state. It's a purple-red state. Nevada. This is the one that kind of makes me go, how reliable are these polls? Trump ahead 50-38 in Nevada. Nevada has been reliably left of center for a good while now. Curious about that. In fact, from Yahoo News, the same polls showed voters supporting Democratic Senate candidates in Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. That is hard to fathom, it writes, in an era where split-ticket voting, that is to say, voting for different parties for president and other offices like House and Senate, has declined significantly in the past decade. Indeed, Democrats are fretting about potentially losing Senate seats in Ohio and Montana. Both states Trump won twice, and they are all but guaranteed to lose Senator Joe Manchin's seat after Manchin announced his retirement. The Biden campaign also correct that other surveys show Biden winning. This article, by the way, talks to the Biden administration not really sweating these polls. I am. But I must also point out, by the way, that this is a poll of registered voters. Not likely voters, registered voters. Back to this Yahoo piece to get a reaction from the Biden administration. The reality is that many voters are not paying close attention to the election and have not started making up their minds, a dynamic also reflected in today's poll, according to Jeff Guerin, the Biden campaign pollster. In a statement, these voters will decide this election, and only the Biden campaign is doing the work to win them over. This is also, by the way, where I do the wonky thing I like to point out and have done so pretty reliably since I launched this show some 17, 18 months ago. The magic number of 50 is the magic number to pay attention to. And again, these are registered voters, not likely voters. So you have to throw away a lot of those numbers because we all know that registered voters don't always show up to vote, right? And I would imagine we're going to see suppressed turnout in this election cycle, despite there being so much on the line. Democracy, dignity, diversity, a woman's right to choose, peace. In Wisconsin. Oh, you know what? Here's the thing. Let me point out in Wisconsin, that poll actually has Biden ahead of Trump. Did I say the other way? I did, maybe. Biden up 47-45, both below the 50% threshold. I'm going to point out that 50% threshold because I think that's important to point out. Pennsylvania, Trump 47, Biden 44, both below the 50% threshold. Arizona, Trump 49, below the 50% threshold. 49 in Michigan, below the 50% threshold. I think there's a very real chance, by the way, that Biden loses Michigan. Georgia, Trump 49. All below the 50% threshold. And also, likely voters, these are not. It's the likely voters whose polls you want to pay more attention to than the registered voters. Because anybody can be a registered voter, answer a phone call, or take an online poll. It's the likely voter that you want to know about. And I think that's honestly probably why, if I had to guess, the Biden administration is not sweating this as much as the rest of us are. In fact, reading the Yahoo piece here, that line actually bears itself out. The poll showed that while the race looks better when surveying likely voters rather than just registered voters, he still loses Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, even if he wins Michigan. I actually think it's going to be the other way around. I think Wisconsin, Pennsylvania are more likely to go to Biden. If it were right now today, I still think there's a strong chance that Biden loses Michigan and what can you say about Georgia? Even though, by the way, did I save this tab? I think I did from over the weekend. Where is it? Here's the headline from, how long ago was this? April 29th, Phoebe Quinton headline. More Democratic voters move to Georgia ahead of upcoming elections. Data indicates that the state has gained 13,500 more Democratic voters than Republican voters since 2020. Let's see, 13,500 plus the, how many was it, Donald?
11,780.
So that would mean 25,280 votes could separate Biden. And no, I don't see it that way. But that is what Phoebe Quinton at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported just a couple of weeks ago. As campaign efforts ramp up in Georgia ahead of a busy election cycle season, candidates will need to court not only native Georgians, but also registered voters who have moved into the state since 2020, with Democrats apparently having an edge over Republicans. Georgia gained about 13,500 more likely Democratic voters than Republican voters since the last presidential election, according to an analysis by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution of voter registration data from L2, a political data vendor. If I'm going to say data once, I got to say data twice, right? Data. I'm not surprised that they are disproportionately Democratic, said Bernard Fraga, a political scientist at Emory University. He said the voters moving into Georgia mirror national trends of people leaving more Democratic-leaning states such as California, New York, due to high cost of living. Fraga said that since these voters were previously registered in another state before coming to Georgia, they are likely to vote in the upcoming elections. That might give Democrats a small advantage, he said. In the 2020 election, President Joe Biden won Georgia by just 11,779 votes, or a 0.24 percentage point margin of victory. Fraga said that a small change in the mix of voters could swing this year's election one way or the other, including shifts in voting preferences among existing Georgians. Okay, so let me get back to the registered voter v. likely voter situation, and we'll go in the swing states state by state. Whereas amongst registered voters, Trump leads 49-42 in Arizona. It shows here likely voters have a little bit of a lean towards Biden, but still 49-43 margin. In Georgia, by the way, it looks like Trump hits that 50% threshold, despite the 13,000 new Democratic voters. It goes 50-41 instead of 49-39. So Biden, again, closes the gap just a little bit. In Michigan, here is a little bit of a swing. It goes from 49-42 in Michigan. This is registered voters, 49-42 favoring Trump in Michigan, to 47-46 likely voters favoring Joe Biden. In Nevada, the numbers are identical. I just don't buy the Nevada numbers. Pennsylvania, it goes from a 47-44 margin for registered voters in favor of Donald Trump to 48, again, not above 50, to 45. And this, I believe this played out in 2020, and I think in some respects in 2022 races as well, where you saw where Donald hit a plateau. There was no number. He would hit a number, 48, 49. It would never go above that, and lo and behold, he wouldn't win because there was soft support, although kind of that, fine, I'll vote for Joe, that doesn't show up in polling. In Wisconsin, registered voters leaned towards Joe Biden by a 47-45 margin. It's nearly identical, 46-47, nearly statistically tied there in Wisconsin amongst likely voters. It's the likely voters to me that you got to pay more attention to than the registered voters when you go to look at polls. And by the way, let me zero in on something that I saw in the New York Times piece that Nate Cohen wrote about all this polling. Listen to this. Nearly 70% of voters say the country's political and economic systems need major changes or even to be torn down entirely. Sounds revolutionary. And I don't say that to invoke the thought of war or anything like that. No, that's not what I'm saying. I am saying, however, that this is one of those deals. If you've listened to this show since I launched it, you'll know that I have sort of been beating the drum for quite a while, and it's too late now. That perhaps Joe Biden should have been the one-term president all along. Guns a-blazing, wish list of progressive and liberal policy demands that he would put into action with the pen, daring Republicans to run against them with whoever the heir apparent was going to be, whether it's Kamala Harris or whomever, on the ticket to take his place. To let him be that friendly, ice cream loving old man who likes to ride his bike, falls occasionally, who is just planting seeds for the trees that he knows he will never enjoy the shade of. I literally, still to this day, believe, had that been the decision he made, the mantra he decided to make his one term, his 4 years, to be about, that he would ride off into the sunset as one of the most popular political figures in modern American history. Instead, he's running for re-election. And he believes he is the singular one Democrat who can defeat Donald Trump, and he is the one who has. But that statement right there, nearly 70%, I'm going to reread it again here. Nearly 70% of voters say the country's political and economic systems need major changes or even to be torn down entirely. Is that something voters could even deign to expect from Joseph Robinette Biden, who has been in the halls of Congress and inside the D.C. Beltway since 1972? Of course they can. They can't expect that. It's something that, if not a majority, a plurality of liberals and progressive voters in 2016 were clamoring for. But my God, can you believe it's been 8 years? 8 years since our revolution, since Bernie Sanders tried to take on Democratic establishment and political establishment in general, who, by the way, polled better. This is just ancient history now, but who, by the way, polled better than Hillary Clinton did head-to-head versus Donald Trump. American voters were engaged by that. My consistently Republican voting maternal grandmother loved Bernie Sanders. She was picking up what he was putting down. It's an opportunity lost. And there really hasn't been an heir apparent for him either. When you think about it, keep an eye on Ro Khanna, congressman from California, who I visited with about a month or so ago when he was in South Carolina for the, was it the Young Democrats Convention? Sharp guy. He's also backing congressional candidate, friend of mine, friend of the show, Mal Hyman, who's running for Congress in South Carolina's 7th Congressional District. If you'd like to sprinkle a little love their way, hey, by all means, help them out. So, yeah, I mean, that change that Americans are clamoring for, 70% of those who were polled, I mean, would they be happy with an electoral college that actually better reflected the will of the voter than uncap the House? Where's the candidate that's running to uncap the House? We've been stuck at 435 since the 1930s. Why? The population of the country has tripled since then. Why don't we have 1,200 in the House? That right there, just making the House of Representatives more befitting of the population would balance the Electoral College in such a way that, while you still may have quirks where you don't win the popular vote, but you win the Electoral College, the greater likelihood is that the Electoral College at least represents the diaspora of the 50 states and the way each state voted. Why do we only have 9 Supreme Court justices, by the way? That number as well hasn't changed in quite a while, and yet we have 12 circuits. Shouldn't we have one justice for each circuit? Oh, and then you're thinking, but what if you need the tiebreaker? Okay, fine. Then you have the tiebreaker. You enact you've got John Roberts. He is the Chief Justice. So maybe you have a Chief Justice and 12 circuit justices, who, by the way, should all hail. We should have a justice that hails from each circuit region, right? Revolutionary stuff, but guess what? The American people believe in that stuff. They do, and it's not exactly toppling our representative republic. It doesn't topple our system of government. It's not even anti-constitutional. This all would flow right in line with the U.S. Constitution. What if our minimum wage kept pace with the cost of living? We tied it to some sort of inflationary metric. The rising tide would lift all boats from the bottom up. What if we incentivized CEO to average worker pay ratio to be, I don't know, maybe less than 300 to 1? What is it, 580, 600 to 1 now? What if we made it just, 100 to 1 or 200 to 1? I'm not saying that the federal government would have to mandate it, but you incentivize it in such a way that businesses would be like, we'd be crazy to turn down that tax break by overpaying our CEO comparable to the whatever the standard would be. The majority of Americans are actually for that too. And by the way, I feel like that's one of those things. It's like, when you put your dog's pill in the meatball to feed the dog, you're giving them a tax break. Yeah, they'll swallow that. The business will. It's for their own good. It's for our own good. These are not revolutionary ideas that involve anybody putting one bullet in one gun or threatening to take over a federal building or anything like that. This is just stuff that can be done by normal means. The House of Representatives could grow itself if it wanted to. And Congress could act on insisting that we have as many judges on the U.S. Supreme Court as we have circuits. And then make one a Supreme Court Chief Justice so that you have 13, the tie-breaking. But nobody's talking like this. Why? Why is nobody talking like this? It's not radical. It's just sensible, I guess. Back after this. RonShowATL.com, the website where you can get all the show notes from today's show, past episodes as well. Continuing on that thread that we talked about how the New York Times Siena College polling showed that nearly 70% of Americans, registered voters, clamoring for wholesale change. Nearly 70% of voters say that the country's political and economic systems need major changes or even to be torn down entirely. I mentioned 3 that don't cost a dime. No tax increase. I mean, obviously, if you're going to go from 435 to 1,200 members of the House, there's going to be some salary increase. I get that. There's going to be, if you're going to add 3 Supreme Court justices and a Chief Justice to get to 13 so that you've got the 12 districts or circuits all represented by a justice. You line them all up, right? Okay, so there'll be, the new salaries of the justices. But, I mean, these are not crazy expenses. Not like the hundreds of billions we fork over for defense increases all the time, right? These costs aren't much. But they also address the Electoral College problem, and they address the disparity in the U.S. Supreme Court created by Mitch McConnell. That doesn't reflect the will of the majority. Hello, that is a problem. That's when, you start worrying about people storming the gates, right? But then you start thinking about the things that actually do cost taxpayers, at least in the short run. Healthcare for all. College, trade school, university tuition that is affordable or at no cost because we're sending our kids to taxpayer-funded institutions by and large anyway, right? Those things do pay for themselves, by the way. A healthier workforce is a more productive workforce. A more productive workforce makes more things. We export more things. We consume more things. The economy is humming right along. A college degree yields anywhere from a 3 to 4 to 1 return on investment for Uncle Sam or whoever pays the tab. Actually, just for Uncle Sam. When Uncle Sam's just getting the boost in the tax revenues. Radical stuff, though, right? And it's actually fiscally responsible. And it actually deals with a lot of the inequalities that exist. By racial, by gender, by generational. But we're not going to get that sort of rhetoric in the 2024 election cycle. And that's why a lot of Americans are like, these two again. Let me pivot real quick I saw something on Twitter X platform. Joey Palomino, is that how you say his name? He ran for Congress here in Georgia a while back. He shared something from the Cato Institute. Joe Biden catches a lot of flack, of course, because of what's going on at the southern border. I'm going to read a little bit what Joey Palomino tweets. Very interesting stuff done by the Cato Institute. If you look at the data, President Biden actually expelled a higher percentage of people at the border than Trump did. He also released a lower percentage of people than Trump did. You can't fix it without Congress, and Trump blew that chance. Palomino's right. Trump, while not in office, coerced Congress not to act on border policy that the situation at the southern border prompted President Joe Biden and Democrats to acquiesce to meet Republicans at the bargaining table. So what Palomino is talking about, by the way, is Cato Institute data that showed this table, and I retweeted this, Twitter X as well, at Ron Show ATL. Outcomes for migrants arrested by Customs and Border Protection at the southwest border. Total encounters under President Trump, 1,365,529. That has ballooned under President Biden. Through no fault of his own, just circumstances have been what they've been. 5,022,027. So the numbers are gaudy. Huge change in numbers. We're talking like 3.6 million more in the same similar 4-year window here. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is just in a 2-year cycle. Both of them. The share of expelled under President Trump, 47.4%. Expelled, sent back. Under Joe Biden, it's 50.9%. As far as those released, let to stay. Under former President Donald Trump, it was 52.2%. Under President Biden, that's down nearly 4 percentage points, 48.6%. So I'm telling you, and the data is too, that President Joe Biden actually expelled more of those arrested migrants by Customs and Border Protection by more than 2.5. I'm sorry, it is exactly 2.5 percentage points. He expelled by 2.5 percentage points more than his predecessor, Donald Trump. And President Donald Trump, when in office, let more free in these United States by a percentage of nearly 3.5 percentage points. But President Joe Biden catches the grief for being soft on immigration policy at our southern border. And again, raw numbers are raw numbers. It's a matter of circumstance more than acceptance or allowance. The numbers are what they are. They tell you right here. President Joe Biden is tougher on those who come to our border illegally than his predecessor, former President Donald Trump was. That more come here is not of his making, but he's tougher dealing with the circumstance. Much to the chagrin, by the way, of a lot of folks on the progressive left. President Biden, I'm going to say it again. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I'm also running low on time here. I'm almost done, so I just figured I'd wrap it up here. President Joe Biden, according to the Cato Institute and all of the data that they culled, shows that President Joe Biden is 2.5 percentage points tougher on illegal immigration. Retweeted on Twitter X at Ron Show ATL. I'll have that in the show notes as well at ronshowatl.com. That is going to do it. All the show notes, again, for each episode you can find at ronshowatl.com. By the way, there's the donate tab. You want to buy me a nice coffee? I make a Dunkin' run occasionally. Keeps these pipes lubricated. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. and on demand all day at ProgressiveVoices.com. Thank you for listening. Much appreciated. We'll catch you next time.